Hi, folks. My name is Martin Halbert. I'm Dean of Libraries here at the University of North Texas, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this joint bridge keynote between two major events that we've been hosting here this week at the University of North Texas. Actually, three if you count our pre-conference. For those of you who, and so I'll sort of say a few words about both events and then introduce our speaker. We've had a very full 3 days already with the pre-conference that we hosted on open educational resources, quite a fascinating topic, open textbooks that are being shared and created at different institutions. We've had 2 days now of the Library Publishing Forum. This is the annual meeting, of course, of the International Library Publishing Coalition, a group that was formed several years ago precisely to foster conversations, innovative conversations and techniques, methodologies, practices in especially academic libraries in collaboration with publishing operations. This was the third Library Publishing Forum, and I thought it was a remarkable set of conversations that have just concluded just a few minutes ago. Many of you are staying over from the one event to this next one, the 2016 UNT Open Access Symposium, a set of related topics. This will be the seventh Open Access Symposium that we've hosted. The first one was in 2010, and we've engaged each year in a revolving series of topics of intersection between the open access movement, open access trends, and developments in the field around these topics. So it's and we thought when we were brainstorming over holding this event last year, we had conversations with our friends at the Library Publishing Coalition. I'm gesturing to Sarah Lippincott, the executive director of the coalition. And we thought that it would be a great synergistic opportunity to hold the two events conjoined, as it were, and allow for a what's I think been already a very synergistic set of conversations and presentations. So welcome. If you are concluding the LP forum, take a breath and get ready for a nice concluding keynote. If you're staying with us or just arriving for the Open Access Symposium, welcome. It's going to be a fascinating day or night tonight, and also a set of presentations and activities tomorrow. We're going to have our speaker in just a moment. I'll introduce him. We'll have time for questions following the keynote, and then we're hosting the joint reception of the two conferences right next door, and I think we are actually that wall will somehow disappear, and we're just going to go straight over there. Then at 6:30 p.m., that'll be hopefully around 5:30-ish, we'll start transitioning to that reception. And then at 6:30, for those of you who have signed up for the dine-arounds or want to come on the dine-arounds, we will have free transportation. We have charter buses to get you to those dine-around locations, and for those that haven't signed up to. And Kevin Hawkins here, my assistant dean for scholarly communication, is going to make a set of logistics announcements at the end of the reception, right, Kevin? About who to follow, where to go, all that sort of thing. The hashtag for the Open Access Symposium is #, for those of you that are tweeting, is #UNTOA16. And I'll repeat that, #UNTOA16. And we'll try to announce that tomorrow morning as well. And so again, welcome. It's again my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Dan Morgan. Dan Morgan is digital science publisher at the University of California Press and is the publisher of Collabra, the press's new value-sharing OA journal. He joined the UC Press in June 2014 to focus on this initiative, on mission-driven, not-for-profit digital initiatives. He has worked in scholarly publishing for over 13 years in publishing management, research, open access, and strategy roles. During that time, he was at Elsevier, where he ended up as the head of the Psychology and Cognitive Sciences Journal Department, then senior manager for open access and other outreach for North America. He is a passionate advocate for open access, open science, and advancing scholarly communication. When he isn't thinking about Collabora, he enjoys playing guitars in bands, films, craft cocktails, I hear, espionage novels, and dogs. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dan Morgan.
See that? Thank you, Martin, and the LPF and the UNTOA Symposium for this invitation to give a keynote talk at this pair of conferences. Well, I have been lucky enough to give some talks on open access events over the last few years. I can honestly say this is the first time I've ever been listed as a keynote speaker, so rest assured my parents got emailed a link to these sessions, and they now know 100% more about the University of North Texas and library publishing. We've got about an hour, so I'm only going to talk, well, I'm going to aim to talk for about 40 minutes. It depends how much you interrupt me or feel the need to talk yourselves. And I really hope to say some things that will generate some reactions. And I say reactions quite specifically. I'm fully aware of the company I'm in this room, and I assume no authority over the topics that I'll talk about in this room. I'm here to share my experiences and some of my ideas, and I hope you find some of them interesting. So while the thread will be what we've been doing at UC Press and our experiences with them, I will use them to jump off into some more general discussions and questions that affect us all. And it's at this point that I should definitely say my views are my own and not representative in any way of the University of California or the University of California Press. So hopefully some of you have at least heard of the University of California Press, and maybe some of you have heard of Collabora and Luminos, our two new open access publishing initiatives here. Can I get a brief show of hands if you have heard of Collabora and or Luminos? Okay, it's only about half the room, but I just want to see how much time and kind of the way I should talk about them. So thank you for that. So to get everyone on the same page, then I'll just quickly, recap both, but as I said, I'm going to jump off into some general questions that can be touched on by both. I'll do Luminos first. I'm not the project manager of Luminos, although I'm kind of heavily involved in the open access initiatives. Collabora is my baby, but I'll do Luminos first because my comments on Collabora segue more neatly into the rest of my talk. But a few seconds on UC Press itself. We're based in Oakland. We're founded we're based in Oakland. We're part of the University of California Office of the President. Thus, we're representative of all the campuses and not just Berkeley. Often people think we're just part of Berkeley because we were based on that campus for such a long time. We're founded in 1893, 3 years after University of North Texas. And like many other university presses, we were originally founded to publish books and papers for the university. We do have a history of championing work that challenges the status quo and that influences public discourse. And our desire to embrace open access, while a natural move for business reasons, of course, was also predicated on wanting to challenge some of the established issues and not just, solely a business move. So, on to Luminos. Purely and simply put, the Luminos program is a way for some of our monographs in the same fields that we already publish in and with the same publication criteria that we already apply to be published open access. It is not about getting into a new area or a type of publication. As those of you who are involved in monographs know, they are the cornerstone of scholarly research in the humanities and some of the social sciences, and have long been under a kind of siege, some say. Shrinking library budgets and rising costs result in higher prices, and thus fewer sales, with the upshot being that presses must simply reduce the number of titles they publish, regardless of the merits of their work. Now, more and more over time, during this crisis, for want of a better word, the publication of every monograph has now become much more of a commercial and cost control and audience size consideration exercise, probably to the detriment of the scholarship that depends on such monographs. And in the current system, distribution is usually limited to a few hundred purchases of each monograph. Libraries just can't build comprehensive collections anymore, readers can't easily discover or access these important scholarly works, and publishers cannot afford to publish more monographs. So it's become this vicious cycle. And a sad truth is that monographs have suffered equally from a generally benign-seeming notion that affects most marketplaces in today's consumer-centric and sales-centric world. You are less likely to sell more units of a book than you are actually specifically desired to be read. I'm thinking, of course, about the moves to usage analysis, on-demand fulfillment, patron-driven acquisition in the marketplace. So in addition to shrinking budgets, there is simply less padding revenue in this monographs business. So why Luminos? Why do it this way? Well, we of course share the dissatisfaction with any moves to treat monographs more and more commercially or to judge them solely by the size of their potential audience in order to save them. And additionally, we were dissatisfied with the options available for authors beyond standalone digital projects for multimedia and digital scholarship. So we came up with a way of sharing costs between all the parties who benefit from publication of monographs: authors, institutions, publisher, and libraries. So in our model, no single entity carries the whole cost burden, making it, we believe, sustainable in the long haul. Of course, the selection and review processes remain the same as in our traditional program. The same exacting criteria and peer review standards apply, and readers and libraries can purchase a print-on-demand copy of the book despite its open availability on the platform, and waivers will still play a part in this model. To get into the financial specifics, $15,000 is the baseline title publication fee, of course, but which no single entity has to pay. $7,500 is the baseline level which the author's institutions cover, and the remainder is covered by the library membership scheme, UC Press, and the print sales elements. The library stream, which is just one of the streams, is created by an account funded by membership dollars. Libraries can opt in to support the Luminos program at various levels of financial support, starting from $1,000 up to $20,000 a year. And $20,000 is, and $2,000 is utilized per monograph from this account. We're extremely pleased that libraries are already joining. We've only been going a fairly short period of time, and also they've been joining at some of the higher levels of support. We're particularly happy with the University of Texas at Austin, a star right up there, and I think there are some people here from them, so thank you very, very much on behalf of Luminos. Quick snapshot of the benefits, the sorts of benefits that are available with these high memberships: are discounts on those title publication fees for faculty at these institutions, representation on the library advisory board, open access materials upon demand, and discounts on print books as well, and prominent recognition as a matter of course. So that's how it works in a nutshell and very quickly, but how is it going? Well, we launched around fall last year, and we already have 13 books published on the platform so far, and many more in development. And they're a mixture of what I'll call born Luminos titles, titles where the acquisition editor was able to, they were going to be published open access from the get-go, and transferred to Luminos books, so books that we had already acquired, which during the development process, acquisition editors got the authors to consider the open access option. So I'll focus on two positives and a negative that we've learned through all of this. The first positive is one that I'm particularly obsessed with in the open access world when you get print on demand as well. Print on demand sales have been much higher than we ever anticipated, essentially exactly the same as our non-open access monographs. So perhaps an open access version of book is exactly the best marketing for a monograph of this type. Perhaps not being able to access a monograph openly is what actually prevents you from buying a print copy. Anyway, a comparative anecdote, by the way, just to kind of spin away from Luminos for a second, is that when I was at Elsevier around 2011, 2012, and we started to work with various MOOC providers, one of the first MOOCs, when it was still MITx before it became edX, was this professor at MIT, Anand Agarwal, did a circuits and electronics course, and he asked, and Elsevier allowed him to release a free version of that book in that course. And the sales of that book, which had been published in 2005, it was fairly deep backlist, spiked, and this is in 2012. So it really is something worth considering, I think, with kind of tie-in print-on-demand things with openly available content. The second positive is, as you might expect, usage. It's delightful to see and be able to measure usage from 152 countries over the entire Luminos program. And the top 20 of countries includes Russia, India, Brazil, Mexico, Poland, Turkey, China, Indonesia. These are not core markets for our scholarly monographs only in print. How could we possibly get to these kind of markets with just a couple of hundred book sales only in print? But still, the one negative is, despite the books going through the same editorial process, despite the book existing in the print medium, so much so that you might even not realize that it's open access, apart from the fact that we say very clearly that this book is also available open access. Despite the book having the potential to reach so many hundreds more people, still, we are hearing that some senior faculty, some department chairs, and some people are advising their junior colleagues with whom we're working to not join the Luminos open access problem, just because it is open access. So I'm not even going to get angry about it. I'm just going to sigh and move on to the next slide. Right, so that's Luminos. But Collabora, now this is my baby. Collabora, in a nutshell, is a broad scope open access journal supported by a low article processing charge of $875, which attempts to create, I call them mini communities, but I guess I just mean communities, within the framework of a larger single ISSN journal. And we're published on the Ubiquity Press platform. But the more unique feature that certainly gets the most attention is the way that the APC business model is constructed. While the total APC is $875, $625 is the part that actually comes to us as the publisher to cover our costs and overheads and revenue requirements. $250 of each APC is placed into what we call a research community fund or account where it is held. In the meantime, editors and reviewers who work on the journal, regardless of the decision made on the papers that they handle, earn points for this work. Every quarter, these points are divided into the funds available in this research community fund account, and these earned points are converted into a monetary value. And then the fun part. Editors and reviewers can decide what to do with this value that they have earned. They can, just focusing on the bottom part here, pay this value forward to their institution's open access budget or library open access budget, pay it forward to Collabora's waiver fund, which, as you can see, is obviously actually a sponsorship fund. There's no APC ever truly waived, it's just paid for by an internal fund, or they can elect to pay themselves. So yes, this paradigm shift is an institutional library actually receiving income into its open access budget due to the editorial and reviewing activity of its faculty on a journal. And so this is now a reality. I mentioned our broad scope. We have launched and developed editorial boards in 3 broad disciplines, creating a much larger whole by sewing together these communities in a mega journal infrastructure. That being said, the subject area that dominates Collabora right now is psychology and cognitive science, but I'll talk more about that later. So a quick recap. We're utterly mission-driven. We've started to drive change, not just to get into open access. We're a mega journal made up of community journals. We have a low APC that is generated from scratch rather than transitioning a business or having a what the market can bear price. We intend to share and spread actual value. There's no lock-in. You can extract the research community funds outside of our universe and to an institution's open access budget or to yourself. Our features are open data, pre-registration options, optional open peer review, a scientific methodological kind of peer review, or what we call selective for credibility only peer review criterion, and with a target of more open access for all. We've worked with various partners, both directly or as regards advice, one of whom is just walking in right now. Hey, Brian. And we can easily say that the journal would not have been possible without such organizations committed to and designing for network sharing, and just really committed to sharing their experiences and ideas about what we wanted to do. So that's the official line. But why did we actually do it this way, and how has it worked out? I mean, that's really what I've come here to talk about. I promised some live streaming and some lesson learned, so here goes, and I'll focus on the why part first. Well, a part of the origin story, as has already been hinted, is that the 2 people that make up the core digital unit at the press, myself and my manager, Neil Blair Christensen, we both hailed, or escaped, if you will, from large commercial publishers. me from Elsevier and Neil from Wiley via NPG. And one of the things that we immediately realized had really bugged us both as we found ourselves at UC Press and having proactively departed that type of publishing was not necessarily the amounts of money that these companies make. Success is a great thing. And I just think it could be leveraged better, as I'll talk about later. But the fact that for an industry quite obviously selling the collaborative services of publishers and the academic community of editors and reviewers, so very little money naturally or operationally makes its way back to the academy or research community. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about discretionary money, like grants or sponsorships or a travel, award that a publisher might pay for. Nor am I talking about society journals, where the clear owner of the asset is the academic or research community, even if the journal is published by a publisher. Nor am I really talking about the top-tier journals, which often have a team of internal professional staff. I'm talking about the regular mid-tier publisher-owned journals, where all of the editors and reviewers are external volunteer academics. Make a quick side point here about that point about those journals, and something I find strange, perhaps because of my internal vantage point of my past. So often when people criticize big commercial publishers, it is the top-flight glamour journals that get all the attention, the Cells and the Natures and the Sciences, or the really bad, declining, shoddy journals that do a bad job and are super slow and are probably really just on the way out. What I've always wanted to point out, though, is that the main part of the financial power of all these big publishers lays in the expansive waistline of the mid-tier. I have a pet name for these journals, and it's the average journal, or the Journal of Average Science, or the Journal of Average Scholarship. And that's not to denigrate these journals. I'm saying it's just those regular journals that no one ever really talks about, but they make up the entire power of these publishers. So if you hear me use that term, you know exactly what I mean. Not the top flight, or even the top-tier society journals or classic proprietary titles, but that large grouping of journals that sits on or just above the average. So with these journals firmly in mind, mine and Neil's point was that beyond editor stipend and the odd sponsored session or coffee break here and there, these mid-tier journals are the main source of cash for these publishers, but that is only ever for the publishers at profit margins that you would make the mind boggle. But to return all this to Collabora, we decided we wanted to do something really simple about that. And even though we fully own and publish the journal, we want to hard code a return to the academic community into the journal, not just to extract value, but to spread and circulate value. So it doesn't matter that it's not a society journal or a top-tier journal. Obviously, and of course, there were very many ways that we could have executed this value-sharing notion. But taking into account that we were already committed to affordable open access and providing a venue for fields less well-funded, we had to tie it into low and transparent APCs. And the result is the model I just described, where it's less about the amounts being shared and more about the notion that everybody shares in the value that is created. And if you're involved in it, you can make a decision over it. And that value can be circulated more rather than just extracted. So, hopefully, I'm describing a nice, nuanced, collaborative and cooperative idea, right? Not just about getting paid. So, when we first announced the journal in January 2015, what was the first headline that ran? New open access journal plans to pay peer reviewers. And so then it started. For every poor cash-strapped postdoc that loved the idea and immediately said they would take the money, the reactions of people that only saw the link to monetary value and, hopefully wrongly, presumed it was all about the cash and doing it to get paid. This is what I heard, of course. Wait, reviewers shouldn't be getting paid for all this work. Reviewing should be a volunteer service in academia. And so we realized that this is much more than just explaining the value-sharing notion. This is also about saying and making clear that we don't think the value itself is the core driver of the activities of reviewers, but a core display of the deep collaboration with the academic and research community, which is when I had to work out another way of explaining it, or at least a more expansive way of explaining it, that acknowledges the ever-present volunteerism inherent in the model. And it went like this. And I also wrote a blog post about this, should you care to read it in full. So to me, volunteering your time means forgoing payment for your time. But how is this changed, or how do you feel when someone else is selling or cashing in on your time instead? My experience of volunteering my time over the years has tended to be for some event or other, or to be often a fundraising activity or some kind of educational outreach activity. And I was always fairly sure I'd never volunteered my time, but then had a third party charge a commercial, profit-generating price for it. Perhaps I had without my knowledge. And so, as I've already said, one of the key notions behind Collabora was acknowledging that in the industry that is scholarly communication, notions of journal or content brands, as much as they're claimed and protected as assets by publishers, are only ever created and maintained in full partnership with the editors and reviewers who handle the editorial functions of the journal, who enable the creation of a product which in the subscription model can be sold. But that is surely a different kind of volunteering then, when someone else is commercially charging for your services and directly improving their brand via your services. So we've had to focus so much more effort, obviously, in explaining this particular nuance and its connection to volunteering, that it is not about getting paid, but getting a chance to make a decision over a portion of the revenue the journal earns because of your work. And the option whether a reviewer or editor can receive the money is not getting paid, but electing to pay themselves, which to me is a big difference from getting paid. And the other two decisions involve paying these earnings forward, either to our waiver fund or to an institution's open access fund. And to me, that's the true volunteering part. Reviewers and editors have actively, at that moment, decided to volunteer their time with either of these two options. So volunteering wasn't just the de facto understood default, it is a choice that is entirely theirs every single time. So either way, our long-term hope at UC Press for Collabora is that all the volunteer work of reviewers and editors continues, and that paid forward earnings will help enable more open access publishing for everyone. But if people want to elect to pay themselves, that is fine too. The most important thing that is never our decision as the publisher, only theirs, and that is the kind of ownership that volunteering should be all about, in my opinion. So, I'm not, of course, and with reminding myself who's in this room, I'm not saying that all scholarly publishing pre-Collabora, or that is not Collabora right now, is some kind of questionable practice of selling volunteered time. I'm obviously hugely aware that a lot of publishing is entirely fair, entirely a cost recovery exercise, entirely driven by principles and fairness. But I'm extremely committed to the principle of fairness, and our model is just one way, or our way, to attempt to be more fair at a publishing company that has to remain sustainable. And it's about partnering much more deeply with the academic and research community, something that library publishing, of course, is just de facto does, because it's just emanating from the academic and research community. Plenty of publishers charge a fair price and ensure that some direct benefits as well as indirect benefits are passed through to the people that actually handle the papers. But I sometimes wonder, what would it be like if some publishers acted more with the principle of fairness? Do we think that all the passionate criticism of the big, usually commercial publishers and various boycotts over the last 15 years would have been the same if others, in addition to these publishers, had been benefiting from all of the considerable business success? So in that blog post that I was mentioned earlier, I asked a deliberately naive, really, and provocative question. What if 1% of all the revenue from just the 3 biggest scholarly publishers was shared every year with the institutions at which reviewers are based? And of course, looking at the 2014 statements, which you can do, that 1% would be at least, it's $50 million. So that's 50,000 $1,000 travel grants in a year or something, or extra childcare facilities at hundreds and hundreds of conferences. Do we think that the work of volunteer reviewers is worth 1% of this kind of revenue? Would it be impossible to allow reviewers and editors to have a say in this? How would we feel if the incredible financial success of all these publishers included financial success for the institutions at which these volunteer academics were based? These financial reports would be publicized with pride. The public relations teams at those publishers would tweet in all caps, "Look at all this money we made, and thank you, and also we're sharing some of it with you." I imagine that none of these boycotts just would ever have happened. You can imagine the reaction I got when I talked about this kind of stuff in my previous job. Well, I'm not there anymore. So in addition to fairness, another principle I hold dear is transparency, and I really do hold it dear. We were very careful in selecting our platform partner in Ubiquity Press. We could have selected them for various reasons: the platform, the utilization of open source services, the agility, the speed in which we would be able to get to market without having to build it ourselves, and all the rest. But really the main reason was that they helped us execute on a principle that we had already agreed that we needed, and that's greater transparency. Now, a quick comment here is that we at UC Press are acutely aware that the APC business model is one by necessity and not by design. All of those microtransactions per article really are a headache, especially when the subscription model works so centrally and quietly in the background. But, for better or for worse, APCs are a current and ready gateway to open access publishing for many publishers. To be clear, while I want to see more transparency in scholarly publishing business models, is not because I think, either, that there is one price that we should be able to get to, nor do I think that we should drive costs down without reason, nor remove markup and margins. I simply believe we need to provide much more transparency information about what services are being offered and what services are being paid for, because so much of it is artificially affected by legacy margins, models, and pricing to market. So an example of this, I ran a session at the SSP last year, the Society for Scholarly Publishing, called What Exactly Am I Paying For? And the subtitle was, How Much Does It Cost versus What Are You Doing with the Money? So again, please check out the blog post for the full story, and it was me, Pete Binfield from PeerJ, Robert Kiley of the Wellcome Trust, and Rebecca Kennison of the Open Access Network discussing it. The session looked into potential futures about being able to understand much more the demands and requirements of different customers. But one of the key points that really resonated with me, that I'd always suspected, but Rebecca Kennison was able to put to rest, was her comment, as she was employee number 1 at PLOS, that the $3,000 APC was always entirely based on what a market can bear cost. Most biomedical authors at the time that PLOS Biology was launched could expect to pay around $3,000 for all the various color and page charges in the main journals that they were used to publishing in. So the thinking was at PLOS at that time was that if they charge this price, then they'll be absolutely fine, because researchers already have this cost in mind and already have that level of money to hand. So fast forward the 10 or 15 years to now, and it is amazing to see how strongly this price point has persisted, with people actually arguing things in essays like it was proven in the mid-2000s that it costs $3,000 to publish an article. Now, as I've said, I don't believe in a one price. I think that APC pricing is obviously based on so many factors, including, as I said, what services you provide, what services you make optional, how glossy your platform is, how much research and development are you doing, and is your journal your sole operation, and are you transitioning any margins or revenue? But an example of how I think this is fair, as long as it's transparent, is that I don't worry at all about eLife's cost per article being as high as they are, because I can see why it's that high. Because of all the staff, the high service level and editorial coordination, the development and the Lens platform and their journal platform, and the fact that they're a one journal operation that they are. And so, to return to my original mention of Ubiquity Press, they provided the perfect partner to be able to do that. If we were going to have to partner with someone for our platform and services and not be able to have full control of the transparency ourselves. So, moving from the why of why we did that, which I promise you I have been talking about, to the how and what's actually been going on. So, Collabora growth has been much, much more skewed to the field of psychology and cognitive science than I ever anticipated. 90% of our submissions have been in the field of psychology. In 2014, when Collabora was being explored and defined, the mega journal occupied a very large share of industry discussion about the future of publishing. PLOS One had reached 32,405 articles in 2014. On Twitter, researchers were discussing whether PeerJ or F1000 Research was the new hipster journal, now that PLOS One wasn't hip anymore. Many publishers were following suit with their own megajournals, like Science Advances, Scientific Reports, Royal Society Open Science, and all these were appearing at similar times. And even Elsevier got in on the act, launching in March 2015 their open access megajournal Helion, with a clear aim to act as the transfer journal for the rejected but not fatally flawed articles from their 2,000 other journals. Anecdotally, I heard tell that at PLOS and various places they were seriously imagining and planning for a future where 50% of the world's scientific research output would one day be published in PLOS One. And graphs like this one, from Pete Binfield's article at that New Zealand Creative Commons website, anticipated that megajournals as defined therein would change everything. However, I am going to admit that a conviction that I completely shared with many, that the +1 style of megajournal is the future of scholarly, or at least scientific publishing, seems to me to be waning a little. I'm not talking about what I want to happen, I'm not talking about what I think would be the most efficient way of publishing. And I also need to be clear, this is based on no thorough quantitative analysis, but rather a personal kind of Dan Morgan sentiment analysis of someone that spends far too much of his time talking about and listening to people talking about open access and publishing. But what we do know is that +1, despite still having a hilariously high number of articles, is declining, shrinking almost 10% from 2014 to 2015 to only 29,380 articles. But from what clearly we might discover be its height of articles published in 2014. So if we can presume that articles not going to +1 now in 2015, 2016 might be going to similar types of journal, which I'm not necessarily sure we can, then the only journal that looks to be solidly capitalizing, and here's where I wish I had a laser pointer, is Scientific Reports from Nature. But even then, which has jumped up, from 4,000 to around 10,000 papers from 14 to 15. But, even then, Scientific Reports is centered much more in the natural and the clinical sciences than +1 ever claims to be. So where are the people not in the natural and clinical sciences going to if they used to publish in +1 and now they don't? Are they going back to perhaps the newly open access, or at least newly hybrid open access journals that they had always published in? I mean, obviously I'm hinting at that I don't actually know, but I'm fascinated in thinking about this. And one of the ways I'm thinking about this is I've been fascinated by a thread that Cameron Naylon, who writes a lot about this stuff, has been exploring recently, about journals as a club good. Now that's an economic term. He speaks a lot about how it will always be problematic to consider scholarly research as a public good and easier to treat it as a club good, in that a community or a club has to feel a level of ownership over it. If you want to read it put into serious economics and social scientific terms, please check out that paper on Elsevier's SSRN, and or if you want the kind of more easily readable version, please check it out on Cameron Naylon's blog there. But in this context, and radically simplifying what he's saying for a moment, and what I think can resonate with us and what I'm going to assume is the open access community or the scholarly publishing community, is that this club notion is not a problem for open access. The open access community and movement must simply ensure that the borders between these clubs are entirely porous. He focuses a lot in this article about what we can do now and therefore what we can now build and therefore must now build along with these porous borders. And I quote, he says, "We must build shared infrastructures that continue to drive costs down while connecting clubs together in new ways. Infrastructures that drive discovery, interaction, and at some level make those cultures more interoperable." He says, we can build it and they will come if we focus on building tools that support existing viable communities, not the imaginary ones that we would like to see. So I have a kind of crisis moment there. I do sometimes wonder if in my engagement with open access and innovation, pure innovation, in my digital team with my whiteboard there, I focus too much on communities and behaviors that I wish we could see, that I want to serve, and not what is actually out there. So, I'm not here necessarily to think out loud about the future strategy of our journal and other such journals, or say that I'm crystal clear about what the future holds. I can certainly say that what we will all be doing with Collabro is ensuring that we are serving more these existing viable communities and not imagining up our own ones. Whether we do this under our one existing ISSN or move into multiple ones, time will tell. But I'm here now ready to admit that I might not know the answer, like I was sure that I did only 2 years ago. Okay, let's look at the time here. I want to get on the home straight and start to wrap up. This time has gone very quickly. And I obviously can't leave it by talking about things that I don't know, right? Admitting that I don't know. So I'll shift gears into things that I think, at least, I do know. What I do know is this. We must all keep at it. We don't always know what will work and even always know how it's worked. Launching a journal, I think, is like throwing a party. You can get all the drinks and food and whatnot ready, but you can never be sure how to guarantee a good time or a good atmosphere. If a good atmosphere occurs, you never see it start, it's just there If it doesn't happen, you can't always tell why. Well, we just know that things do work and great parties do happen. So it is our duty as people engaged in scholarly communication to facilitate that which is happening. It is the principles that should guide us ultimately, and it's those principles that will be important. These are ours, written permanently, very badly, as you can tell, on a whiteboard in our offices. Solve the academy problems first, publishers second. Facilitate, don't control, and don't be greedy. What I also know is this: open access, at least in its scholarly communication context, is an outcome, not a path. We need to stop discussing it like it is a type of business model, a type of peer review, or inherently disruptive and radical, even though we can sometimes position it that way, and realize that we are far from figuring out every way to get there, and the current paths that we're dealing with are shoehorned into the land that we've inherited. Furthermore, the business models underpinning at least gold open access publishing today are, as I've said, models by necessity, not by design. There is a system inefficiency and holdup based on the fact that the majority of budget paying for scholarly publishing is tied up in other places, usually large journal subscription deals. It is hard, therefore, to transition a content business to open access, whether or not one supports the principle, and therefore content businesses are always going to be slow to make the switch. Open access model discussions are severely limited, therefore, because there is just not equal opportunity in the market to experiment with them. Since the early movers like Biomed Central and PLOS, more recent experimentation with models beyond simple APCs has been limited to small organizations and startups willing to take the risk, like PeerJ, like Open Library of the Humanities, or large, huge organizations willing to subsidize everything, like eLife's backers. So how can we appropriately judge which newer models are effective when the experimentation is such low scale and there's such little room for it? Can we, or when can we, move beyond these models which are driven by necessity and not by design? So in addition to the things I do know, here are the 4 things that I do know that I think should stop. We must simply try and stop doing this. Obviously, and I said it before in my slides about Luminos, we have to stop believing that content is affected by a business model. Obviously, with all the standard caveats about junk science and predatory journals. We must stop, or just please keep trying to influence the people that believe that because something is open access, it counts negatively. And I'm specifically talking about those people advising junior faculty not to publish in our Luminos program or other such programs. We must stop forgetting that people are usually the problem, not the things or processes that they do. It's hard to describe what I mean, but it's easiest to describe what I mean with an example. Let's take open peer review. Everyone talks about that a lot. We discuss that a lot. But no discussion of open peer review ever seems to get beyond discussing the sensitive world of people in the hierarchy that are doing open peer review. I think open peer review is great because it will help you decide how much you trust the article, and it gives you great background regarding how the article was developed. And I think it's as simple as that. All the other arguments around open peer review to do with human sensitivities are still really, really important, but they're not actually about open peer review, but the context in which it is done, which is hopefully not going to be always set in stone. They're arguments about the weird and wonderful hierarchical world of ambitious, sensitive humans in the academic infrastructure. So I really want to move beyond those discussions, which we always get to, and get back to talking about how open peer review, in my opinion, would be really, really cool. Criticizing quickly or only criticizing, it's obvious. I don't need to say anything more about that, especially now looking at time. And number 4, not accommodating the outlier or variances or overprescription of process. I think we must always accommodate the outlier. All the costs are with the outliers. Let's just accept that there will be outliers, and let's ensure that the standards that we know are absolutely required to organize clusters of content as a collection of pieces is not extended to control how the individual units of content are expressed. I could say the obvious thing to say, the perfect is the enemy of the good and all that. But I really do think this is a problem which prevents us sometimes from getting things done, is that we're committed to getting it perfect and not accommodating the outlier. Another thing that must stop is this talk. So I really want to get reactions right now, questions if you will, and just really anything that you want to shout out at me. And if you want to ask a question that I didn't even talk about here, please do so. Thank you.
I'm Sandy Thatcher, former director of Penn State University Press.
Hey, Sandy.
I have two quick comments. One is to note the dichotomy in peer review between journals and book publishing. You know, we've long paid scholars to review monographs. We haven't paid them to review journal articles. Now,
Correct.
there's an irony there because, as you know, monographs generally lose money and journals actually make money.
Yep.
So it seems perverse to pay in the one case and not in the other. But I'll just leave people to reflect on that irony. The other thing I wanted to say was about your monograph series and your experience that people are advising people not to submit to Luminos. We set up an open access monograph series at Penn State in a way that I think obviated that problem. And it happened because two language departments at Penn State were motivated to come to the press and encourage us to transition what had been a print-only monograph series into an open access monograph series. Now, they set up a faculty committee from both departments with senior people in the field who were very well known. So this is kind of like an editorial board. So, you know, journals often flourish or not depending on the reputations of the people serving on their editorial boards. So we did not experience with our monograph series what your experience with California, and I think largely because the reputation of those people who served on that editorial board really helped deal with that problem. So just make that as a possible.
If I can react back to that. No, I am genuinely surprised myself with, I mean, it doesn't happen a lot, but I'm saying it's at least happened on some occasions that we've had that feedback on Luminos. And bearing in mind, I might expect it at, you know, a publishing company that publishes books where there is less academic editorial involvement. But, you know, this is UC Press, where there's a known and kind of publicly visible editorial board, a little similar to yours, called the Editorial Committee, based of people, you know, from all of the UC campuses vetting all of our monographs. So there's no difference whatsoever, you know, in the process. But still, there's this kind of weird belief in some communities.
Questions?
Talking about reevaluation, now that the Luminous program has been up and running for a while and you're seeing that you're getting the same return on investment through your print on demand that you were on regular books, have you considered adjusting your model? It seems like you're kind of getting extra with the three parties also contributing to that pot.
Good question. I mean, my fear is that it's, you know, this first 2 years we'll see, you know, like I think we need to do it for a few years just to see whether that print on demand kind of phenomenon continues. This may be that people are still used to just buying print books, so they will, but as people get more used to kind of just utilizing it on a platform. But yes, I mean, the whole part of the model is that there's no kind of margin kind of left in there. You know, any kind of extra left over from the library membership account goes to pay for waivers. So if the print on demand you know, revenue is much higher, then it will be spread to kind of offset any kind of falls in revenue in any of the other areas. Yeah, and you know, and as with Collabora and Luminos, I mean, we're doing a lot of this very publicly and transparently. So you know, we plan on sharing. You know, here I am telling you about this now, and we plan on sharing our learning for sure. That's the great thing about all these initiatives. I mean, most of them, Luminos, Knowledge Unlatched, all these kinds of things. You know, there's a great kind of sharing economy of sharing how it's worked, because I think we do all want to see these things succeed. But maybe is the answer. Maybe the model will be adjusted, and I'd love to, you know, obviously the thing that I'd love to adjust is to, you know, bring the authors and institutions, you know, costs down, but time will tell, just with seeing whether that print revenue stays as higher than anticipated.
Other questions?
I'm Johan Rorik. I founded Linguistics in Open Access, you know, and I'm editor-in-chief of Glossa, formerly Lingua at Elsevier.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for... well, it's not about me, it's about... thank you for a very inspiring talk, actually. We agree on almost everything. And my talk tomorrow, I will go into that, the complementarities between these projects. I have one question though, where we, I think, differ, namely, why do you want to own the journals? Because you said at one point that you own the journals that you
Oh, I
have,
see.
right?
I mean, I guess I was making that point more to showcase that usually when revenue is operationalized back to the academy, it's due to the academy actually owning it. So my point is that we're volunteering that return, not doing it via kind of a legal obligation. So that's more what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think in the ownership, in the open access space, ownership of a journal is a completely different thing anyway, because obviously we don't own the copyright of the content. It's really about owning the trademark and, you know, having a relationship with the platform provider and things like that, and paying those bills.
Yeah, because one of our points is that, you know, researchers should own the journal. So that's
Right.
maybe where we
Yeah,
might differ.
and I think I don't disagree with setting things up that way. I think ownership is I mean, it's kind of a fluid concept anyway in journals publishing, as I think both you and I agree on, but in the newer context of open access publishing, it's kind of fluid by default, because yes, there is so very little ownership of the content.
It's just that the traditional
Other than
publishers,
authors.
shall we say, I mean, that's really the breaking point for them. I mean, when we were negotiating with Elsevier about Lingua, that's the one point that they didn't want to budge on.
Yep.
I mean, they could go down on APCs, they could even negotiate copyright, but ownership of the journal, that was non-negotiable.
Yep.
So,
I mean, I would honestly see, I mean, a publisher like UC Press, I mean, I can't speak for the whole entity that is UC Press, but I can speak, you know, for my role in the digital team. You know, I think those kinds of considerations become less important. As long as we can achieve sustainability, I think the legal ownership of something is a much more fluid. Yeah.
Others?
So, as a faculty member, one of the things that I'm interested in is this problem of stop believing that the content is affected by the business model.
Yes.
And this seems very ingrained in some academic fields more than others. And so part of it is disciplinary. But I wondered if you had suggestions. How do we, as like part of faculties, actually move forward to get more acceptance of open access models for publishing? Like, what can we actually do within contexts that are, I mean, I just have to say, from my perspective, there is a great deal of resistance, specifically in, you know, perhaps more conservative disciplinary contexts. So, suggestions.
Suggestions. I mean, in the interest of time, I mean, I could talk about that, well, I could set up a whole conference about that. But in the interest of time, I'll say I think the key things are the 2 bullet points in that top section. Too many people think open access is a type of peer review and inherently disruptive and radical. I mean, one of the biggest plays that traditional publishing was able to do back in the early 2000s was inspiring everyone to believe that just by making something open, it meant that it was some sort of radicalism. You know, whereas of course, general openness, I mean, like this kind of hyper-commercial role in scholarly publishing really only emerged in the 1950s. You know, so the type of peer review thing I think is important. I mean, what gets a lot of column inches in kind of press about open access is new initiatives like PLOS ONE, where they essentially said, you know, it was an inherently new type of peer review model. Anything that is scientifically sound will get published. So then what, you know, I'm not saying that's wrong or in any way bad, but it's about being transparent. You know, that's what they do, but that's obviously not what the Luminous program does. But I think what some people will do is when they're not completely engaged with open access, they'll remember having once read that thing that open access equates to much lower standards, or you know, different standards at least in scholarly publishing. So, you know, I think that can be a problem in some areas. And I think, you know, I really was not able to do justice to what Cameron Neylon has been writing about the notion of club goods. I really do encourage you, and if you're taking pictures of citations, I'll put it here, just to, you know, a lot of open access, I hate to say the word rhetoric because I'm on the side of it, but a lot of open access discussion is about, a knowledge commons kind of ideal. It's about the future, it's about the public good of knowledge, which is an outcome of even considering knowledge and journals as club goods. So that's the most important thing to say. And I think maybe this newer way of thinking about it, of making discipline-specific faculty members understand that we're not saying that everyone can now understand what you're doing. You still have a club where you guys, the experts, and you guys set the tone of what is good and bad research in your club. That's fine. We're just saying that the border, the porousness of the border that is your club needs, it just needs to be porous, and there needs to be interoperability between the content that you create and the content that we can all consume. So that was a round, I said I wouldn't go on and I just did, but peer review considerations, people thinking that open access is just different inherently because there have been so many different innovations, and people believing too much that open access is a destruction of their club when it does not need to be.
Question from the back corner.
I hope actually you'll forgive me maybe just a statement on that, and
Sure.
This is something that I've been hammering on for a little while. It's like everything else, to be honest, how you deal with the open access problem. It's how you deal with sexism, is how you deal with racism, is how you deal with inappropriate behavior. The people who are in decision-making places need to fight it every single time, one person at a time. We're talking about some disciplines that are more conservative than others. Historians, for reasons that aren't clear to me, absolutely hate open access. The only way of dealing with that is to make fun of them. When you're on tenure committees, I'm on tenure committees a fair bit at my university. I often hear about how stuff is not excellent because it's open access. The people who are fighting that are not shy of saying that, and we need to be not shy saying it back. Personally, I don't think it's actually ever going to change unless that happens. That's why, I think the gloss move was that people just have to put their foot down and just say, I'm sorry, it really is good. And that means you have to do it for other people too. Anyway, that's just my observation being in a university.
Yeah, no, I hope things like Glossar and things like Luminos can literally be, like you can say, it's so obviously the same thing. Like you come to UC Press to publish a book, it goes through this peer review process, it's either published traditionally or open access. It's the same. You can submit to Dr. Roerich a paper that gets reviewed by the same people. It was in this container, it's now in this container. I think these are the kinds of oversimplified examples we need to showcase that the content is the same thing.
One final question here.
My name is Jeff Bonham with Texas Christian University. I'm really drawn to this idea that the Geological Society of America is going to make all of their journals open access within the next 3 years, starting in 2017 and kind of gradually over the next 3 years.
Yep.
And to me, that goes a long way towards making open access acceptable to the scholars in those disciplines. But I'm interested in, do you think that other societies will adopt that model? It was a risk for them.
It is a risk for them, and it's why I definitely say, how did I say it, that it is hard, and therefore just because people are slow, it doesn't mean that they're unwilling. And I think we need sometimes, and perhaps passionate open access advocates need to cut people a break sometimes, because many people want to transition to open access, but it's tough when you've essentially sold a small amount of something that is very high quality for a certain amount, and to move to a business model where really the easiest way to be sustainable is to sell a lot of something like +1. So that's nothing to do with whether you believe in the outcome of open access or not. It just means it's damn hard. So that's why, I really do want to stress that we are nowhere near the end game of figuring out open access, because the business models are just so inherently bad at supporting it. I mean, what we ultimately need is something that's as quiet and as behind the scenes as subscription prices. I think some of the offsetting that is being demanded in Europe, I think some of the kind of centralized processing of APCs, that's where we need to go. But it's hard in the US because there's very little centralization of that kind of administration or policy. It's easier in Europe, but still there. It's just going to be slow because there's going to be so much resistance from it, from, guess what, the people that are making bank by resisting that. So it is tough, and I mean, good luck with any society. Good luck to any society doing it. That's not to say good luck, you'll fail. I genuinely mean good luck, because I think, again, we need more examples of showing that it works. We need more examples of people, as the gentleman in the back said, actually doing something rather than talking about it.
Thank you.
Well, join me in thanking Dan Morgan once again.